It was a peaceful evening for Palestinians on 17th October. Yeah, you heard it right. It was peaceful because earlier that day no airstrike occurred and the already injured people were getting treatment in Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital. Apart from the injured, a lot of people were taking shelter since their places were bombarded and they had nowhere to go. The hospital was densely packed. And then exactly at 7 p.m., 471 people at the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital were dead. Few hours after the strike, Israel was at the forefront giving dual statements, leaking footage of the airstrike and even releasing an audio of two Hamas operators just to prove to the world that we, Israel, didn't do anything. It was them. It was the Palestinian Islamic jihadists within Gaza that bombed its own hospital. But after seeing the footage and different statements from the Israeli military, the whole world is left in confusion. So I'll be explaining every minor detail that happened that evening in this video. Let's go some days before the 17th of October. Israel asked the hospital administration to evacuate the hospitals. In fact, Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital was one of the 20 hospitals in the north of the Gaza Strip facing evacuation orders from the Israeli military. Israel told Palestinians in the north of Gaza to move south for their own safety. Israel's military specifically told Zaytun residents to move south. About 1,000 people were in Al-Ahli Arab Hospital on Tuesday morning and more were rushed there later in the day after Israeli army had warned residents in the Zaytun neighborhood to evacuate their homes. New York Times published an in-depth investigation based on the footage, and this is what they have concluded. Israel has fired more than 8,000 munitions into Gaza and had even hit Al-Ahli Arab Hospital with an illumination artillery shell 3 days earlier. And you all, it's not me saying this, it's New York Times report. United Nations made a shocking claim that over 115 attacks on hospital have been done after 7th October. And Dr. Naim, who was working in the hospital at the time of explosion, told CNN that it wasn't the first time the hospital had been hit. He said that 2 missiles had struck the building 3 days earlier. And he further added that we thought it was by mistake. And the day after the airstrikes, the Israeli called the medical director of the hospital and told them, "We warned you yesterday. Why are you still working? You have to evacuate the hospitals." So what we can conclude from different evidences is that Israel was continuously giving evacuation orders and even they tried to frighten people through airstrikes. So the doctors would stop doing treatments and empty the hospital. Also, Israel has a history of bombing hospitals and schools and it's not a big deal for them. But this time it's different because they blamed Hamas for all of this just to divert attention from them and bring all the attention to this issue of who actually bombed the hospital. So what exactly happened on the 17th of October evening? For a moment, just forget who is right and wrong. And now we will together analyze what Israel Defense Force spokesperson Daniel Hagari said about that incident, because after his claim, the whole world was left in confusion. So he deserves some attention in this video.
At 6:59 p.m., a barrage of around 10 rockets was fired by Islamic Jihad from a nearby cemetery.
From a nearby cemetery? Okay, fine, but what about this?
The trajectory analysis from the barrage of rockets confirms that the rockets were fired close proximity to the hospital.
So here's what BBC said about this. The spokesman said it had been fired from a nearby cemetery, and there is a cemetery next to the hospital. But a map displayed by the spokesman showed a launch site further away. We have not been able to locate a cemetery there. This is exactly where the cemetery or graveyard is located, just next to the hospital as stated by BBC. Keep this actual cemetery in mind because the cemetery depicted by IDF spokesperson doesn't actually exist. So watch this video that was recorded within Gaza at the time of the explosion. The sound of the incoming rocket clearly tells us that the rocket wasn't launched from a nearby cemetery. Rather, it was coming from a pretty good distance. Channel 4 talked to an eyewitness and here's what she said.
I live very near to the hospital and we have seen, the neighboring area have seen the bombs dropping on the hospital. The explosion was so massive and so huge, and the mountain fire rising up into the sky was so horrible. We instantly knew that this is the Ahli Arab Hospital. It's the Baptist Hospital, the oldest Christian hospital in Gaza Strip.
Doppler effect analysis was done by the Earshot Audio Investigation Group, which looked at the sound waves related to distance and found that the missile likely approached from the northeast, east or southeast, but not from the west as Israel's military has claimed. So this first claim made by IDF that it was launched from a nearby cemetery is completely false and impossible.
According to our intelligence, Hamas checked the reports, understood it was an Islamic Jihad rocket, that it was a rocket misfired by Islamic Jihad.
Al Jazeera was streaming live at the time of the hospital explosion, and they did a fantastic job digging up the case. According to Al Jazeera, there were 4 airstrikes before the hospital explosion.
Starting at 1854-28, 1855-03, 1857-42, 1858-04.
These were just the airstrikes, but the rocket that was questioned by everyone was also recorded on Al Jazeera's live stream.
Going back to the Al Jazeera live feed at 1859-35, we can see a single rocket launched from Gaza. This is the rocket in question.
The footage clearly shows that the rocket wasn't launched from the cemetery, number 1, and number 2, it wasn't misfired as stated by IDF. Rather, it was intercepted by the Iron Dome of Israel's defense system.
15 seconds later, Al Jazeera's live feed shows that the same rocket was intercepted at exactly 18:59:50. This interception has the same afterglow seen in previous interception. A closer look at the video captured by the Al Jazeera live feed shows the rocket being completely destroyed and broken apart in the sky. This rocket was intercepted and was the last one launched from Gaza before the bombing of the hospital.
When the rocket is intercepted in mid-air, it is left in pieces, making it impossible to kill hundreds of people. Al Jazeera's live stream timestamp shows that the rocket was intercepted at 18:59:50 and then the rocket was converted into debris. Listen to the sound again. Do you think it is the debris of a rocket that killed almost 500 people? And wait, the New York Times made an unexpected claim. The missile seen in the video is most likely not what caused the explosion at the hospital. It actually detonated in the sky roughly 2 miles away and is an unrelated aspect of the fighting that unfolded over the Israeli-Gaza border that night. They further added, and it's an important point to notice, the Israeli military says Israel doesn't fire Iron Dome interceptors into Gaza, and indeed the missile seen in the video may not have crossed over into Gazan territory. After all of this evidence from authentic sources and analyzing the footage, it has become crystal clear that the rocket seen in the video was not fired from Gaza. It was from Israel. And secondly, it wasn't misfired. Rather, it was intercepted, because rockets are not intercepted when they are in the Gazan territory. Thirdly, the rocket that caused an explosion in the hospital and the fired rocket in the videos have no relation with each other. It was all planned to fool us, so their story would look more credible. Now the question is, if the rocket was intercepted and the sky was kind of clear because we couldn't see any rocket from the cemetery or from anywhere else, then how come such destruction happened at 7 p.m.? I want you to first look at this tweet that was posted by Hanania Naftali, who is a digital aide to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This tweet was deleted later, but now keep this tweet in mind and look at this investigation.
5 seconds after that interception, an explosion in Gaza can be seen, followed 2 seconds later by a much larger explosion. This is the strike that hit Al-Ahli Arab Hospital. As a result, Al Jazeera digital investigations team found no grounds to the Israeli army claim that the strike on the Al-Ahli Arab Hospital in Gaza was caused by a failed rocket launch.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, 2 explosions happened. The explosion at Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital occurred 7 seconds after the rocket interception at 18:59:50. So if IDF's claim that the misfired rocket caused the explosion is true, then for the 7 seconds, what was the rocket debris doing in the air Flying? IDF built the whole story but forgot to add logic. Conclusions of the two analyses published on Friday expressed serious doubt in Israel's narrative and found that the projectile that hit the hospital was fired from the direction of Israel. Another forensic architecture, a research group based at the University of London, analyzed photos of the impact crater, saying that patterns of radial fragmentation on the southwest side of the impact crater, as well as the shallow channel leading into the crater from the northeast, indicate that projectile likely came from the northeast, the direction of the Israeli-controlled side of the Gaza perimeter. The New York Times explained the explosion mystery really well using satellite imagery. Here's what they said. The missile in the video was never near the hospital. It was launched from Israel, North Gaza, and appears to have exploded above the Israeli-Gaza border at least 2 miles away from the hospital. The Times synchronized the Al Jazeera footage with 5 other videos filmed at the same time. These different videos provided a view of the missile from the north, south, east, and west, using satellite imagery to triangulate the launch point in those videos. The Times determined that the projectile was fired toward Gaza from near the Israeli town of Nahal Oz shortly before the deadly hospital blast. Chris Cobb-Smith, an investigator and explosive expert, also agreed the evidence indicated the projectile may have come from the opposite direction claimed by the Israeli military. Hence, the second claim made by IDF that the rocket was launched within Gaza is completely false as well. Since 2 explosions happened at 7 p.m. and no incoming rockets like this were seen in the air, then was it done by an Israeli aircraft as mentioned by Hanania Naftali? Because he himself accepted that it was done by an Israeli aircraft to destroy a terrorist base in a hospital. And Channel 4, which published a detailed video analysis, said that there was no proof that the mid-air and ground explosions are necessarily linked. Israel has been pushing this narrative that Hamas has established underground tunnels in hospitals, schools, and mosques. And we all remember how quickly Israel demolished the mosque after Hamas retaliated on 7th October. And 31 mosques have been destroyed within Gaza after 7th October, which is extremely barbaric. Israel is making Hamas responsible for all this, but what about the genocide happening in the West Bank? Because the West Bank doesn't have any Hamas, and they are still getting massacred. Okay, so let's bring all of the points together. Israel has been warning not only this hospital, but many others for days. Number 2, Israel considers Hamas the bad guys, and according to them, Hamas does all the terrorist work in tunnels that are under hospitals, schools, and mosques. Number 3, no rocket or missile exists in Gaza that can do such damage, especially a misfired rocket. Number 4, we couldn't see any rocket launched within Gaza at the time of explosion because Hamas or PIJ usually launch a barrage of rockets that are all intercepted by an Iron Dome. The rocket launched at 18:59:50 didn't misfire or malfunction. Rather, it was intercepted by an Iron Dome within Israel. 2 explosions happened exactly at 7 p.m., killing hundreds of people. Hanania Naftali acknowledged in a tweet that it was done by the Israeli Air Force to destroy the terrorist base that is under that hospital. So we can conclude that the explosion was done by an Israeli guided missile that was aimed at the destruction of that imaginary terrorist base that is hidden under the hospital. The missiles were specifically targeted on the hospital, and they made it seem like it was done by Islamic jihadists. Now I know what your next question is. If Israel really did it, then why couldn't we see deep craters or structural damage to the hospital?
No cratering and no structural damage to nearby buildings.
Channel 4 actually visited that place and did an in-depth investigation, and here's what they have concluded.
Small craters you'd expect from a mortar strike or artillery round, not a missile. Surrounding buildings have only superficial damage, not structural collapse. Some of the windows of an adjoining church remain intact. This makes a ground-detonating Israeli missile strike unlikely, but it doesn't rule out an airburst munition, which could cause major loss of life but would produce far less structural damage.
I'm not talking about the specifics of rocket here because this is still to be investigated and we don't know exactly what rocket was used for the explosion. The important part of missing evidence is missile fragments. Projectiles are often identifiable by the wreckage of their shell and can be used to determine the projectile's origin, like from where it was launched and all the details that are necessary for this investigation. But in this case, the evidence has yet to be found. Surprisingly, Israel is giving so much clarification that PIJ did it. If they are really speaking the truth, then all of us want independent investigations to be done ASAP. No interventions from outside sources whatsoever. And the whole world will know the truth. Oh wait, did I mention something that IDF really worked hard on?
بقول تعاون الجهاد الإسلامي من علم هذا شكله من علم من المقدرة الورا دي فلا تحطم.
If you use a little common sense and if you have some knowledge about the military of any country, you must know that they never talk in understandable language. Rather, they always talk in code words and they never ever discuss something this serious on a call in understandable language. Also, if any operation happens, the whole military crew knows about it. This is the common sense part that IDF really lacked. But now here are some key points to consider from this audio recording. Number 1, their accent or dialect is totally different. Number 2, the conversation they are having shows that such a small military group isn't aware of their own operations, which does not happen in the real world. Number 3, one fake actor in the operator tells the other one that it was fired from the cemetery behind Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital and it was misfired and fell on them. This story has already been exposed in the video and how it wasn't launched from the cemetery and the rocket wasn't misfired, rather it was intercepted by an Iron Dome within Israel. While doing the research for all of this fake audio thing, I found a big contradiction. Let me rephrase it. I found a huge contradiction. First sentence of this fake Hamas operator was this: I'm telling you this is the first time we are seeing a missile like this falling. Okay, kid, then what about this?
These are failed launches during this war. These are all failed launches, and one of them was in the hospital Al-Ahli Al-Madani.
450 misfired rockets, and you are seeing this for the first time? Where have you been your whole life? The thing that has surprised me the most is that genocide has been happening for decades on Palestinians. How many times Israel has mentioned that they want Palestinians to be ethnically cleansed. They are teaching their kids to kill the Arabs. They are preparing them to occupy the whole of Palestine and remove every Muslim from the land of Palestine. It's just one hospital bombing case. Israel has a history of destroying our mosques where the Quran and books light from cupboards and go under the rubble. They bomb schools and hospitals and they blatantly blame Hamas. They have labeled Hamas as a terrorist organization. They are changing the narrative and blaming Hamas for every evil. But you have to be smart and not fall into this trap. You have to open your eyes and see the truth. Let's for a minute look into the definition of terrorism along with a graph, and then you are going to decide who is the real terrorist. A person who uses unlawful violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. I am leaving the judgment on you.
I do not believe that most Palestinian people support what Hamas did on October the 7th. I think Hamas is a terror group who committed an act of unspeakable depravity and terrorism, and they must be held accountable.
Let me tell you one thing. When the king becomes oppressor, he himself ignites the heart of the one getting oppressed. They do not sit and obey the oppressor. They stand up, unite with each other, and resist the oppressor. Hamas wasn't created in one day. Israel created Hamas. But let me show you the true side of Hamas that the funded media is hiding from you.
When she first arrived, they told them that they are Muslims and they're not going to hurt them. They ate the same food that the Hamas was eating. My mom is saying that they treat them kindly and provided for them.
You know what? I instantly thought of 9/11 after Israel blamed Hamas, because these evil people always hide behind the term Islamic jihadist. And then I realized that I was true after I heard Joe Biden saying this.
Since this terrorist attack took place, we've seen it described as Israel's 9/11. But for a nation the size of Israel, it was like 15 9/11s.
I want you all to make a promise to me. A promise that we are not going to celebrate any Human Rights Day, because when humans are getting massacred, none of these organizations are standing up. We are not going to celebrate Mental Health Day because people who are losing their whole families and wake up to the sound of bombs, none of these organizations are talking about their mental health. We are not going to celebrate any International Humanitarian Day because these organizations proved that humanity doesn't exist for them. We are not going to celebrate any Women's Day because when women were taking birth control pills and delivering the babies on roads, none of the feminist or women's advocates spoke about it. We are not going to celebrate the International Day of Happiness or the International Day of Peace because it doesn't exist for us now. All of these organizations are puppets, and Allah has exposed them. Allah has exposed their reality, and they are not made to protect our rights. Rather, they have their own agenda, and they only say things that they have been taught. They are only made to protect their agendas. They don't care about us at all.
That this is a people struggle for 106 years. 106 years because it all started here by the British Empire, where they promised our land without consulting us, and they turned us in that 67 words into non-Jewish minorities. We were 98% of the population. We had lived there for millennia. We were the cardinal of civilization. We produced every prophet. Palestine is the birthplace of Christianity. We were literally the hub of the region. Since then, this is a people struggle for freedom, for justice, for equality.
Former American vessels carrying nearly 4,000 Jewish refugees arrive at the port of Haifa, Palestine.
نصر قريب يا فلسطين شهداء الأقصى في الجنة أحياء القدس ستبقى لفلسطين